Please stand. My brothers and sisters, I ask you to listen attentively to the good news as recorded by Matthew. Jesus says to his disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field, which a person finds and then hides again, and out of joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls. When he finds a pearl of great price, he goes and sells all that he has just to own it." The gospel of Christ. Praise be to you, O Christ. Please be seated. So, folks, I think a little bit earlier you got a little example of holy anger. In the course of a couple weeks, when you start hearing these things over and over again, and I already realize as I'm sitting here that I did not say, and people will say, well, listen to what he's saying, there is no such thing as the devil. There's, of course, yes, there is the opposite of goodness, which is evil, and evil exists in the world. So when we piece this together and we put out the first message, let's make sure that I'm clarifying the fact that I'm not denying the presence of evil. What I do have a problem with are ministries that are set up in such a way that you go and you sign up on a chart, you sign up on a clipboard so that the pastor can expel and exorcise a demon out of you. I don't understand for the life of me how, if you are possessed by a demon, the demon's going to want you to go to church to be expelled from that person, right? I mean, there's no reasoning to some of this. So, and then innocent, honest people who just simply don't know any better. And of course, regrettably, there's a donation required with all of this, and it's frustrating. It just really bothers me because there is good news. It's called good news. And as much as there is the presence of evil in the world, there is the presence of Jesus Christ. And there is that love that is our focal point. And yes, we all stumble. We all make mistakes. Absolutely. But that is what the cross was for, was to forever and always ensure us that we were loved and embraced. And that as long as we are trying to be as faithful as we are, when we stumble and fall, then yes, of course, there is the blood of Christ that covers us, redeems us, has us in righteousness before the Father. Absolutely. But it is troublesome because I never hear enough about the good news. Jesus is talking to an audience here and talks about the kingdom of God and keeps giving out these samples of what this is, parables. And he's using parables because these are simple people. They're not very well educated. They don't have degrees. They're farmers. They're herds people, shepherds. They're people who work with their hands, carpenters, whatever the case. And Jesus is using this situation and parables over and over again to simplify the whole process. Easter time, Lincoln Academy does the egg hunt outside. And the egg hunt to me is always kind of funny. I think there's 100 eggs or more, right? And the eggs are literally laid just on top, all throughout the entire backyard. And I'm never here for it, but Donna sends a picture. And if you look, it looks like, a whole herd of ducks came in and dropped all these colorful eggs all over the backyard. And then when the kids go outside, you'd really have to have eyesight problems or be colorblind not to see the 100 eggs that you run around and get to pick up. It's easy, right? You go and you pick them up, but the kids love running around and just chasing and getting them, right? But this parable to his audience is something that is foreign to us. So Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that is found in a field, and then you go and you sell all that you have so you could possess the field so that you could get the treasure. First of all, it's really intriguing that, there is treasure in a field. So it's important to know that at this time there are no banks. There's no banks. There's no FDIC, guaranteed savings, There's no entity that is supporting if you give your money to someone to hold. How did people save money? They dug a hole. They took the money. They stuck it in a hole. and they tried to remember where it was. That's saving money. That's how they did that, so that if someone broke into the house, they wouldn't find it. Now, the audience is fully aware of this. The question then comes is, what is this stranger doing on another person's piece of property, digging around, looking for something? So it's obviously not his field. So why is he on someone else's field, digging, trying to find, or just stumbling then across, this treasure, and then goes to do this, right? So Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like this. So one, it is not simply a couple of coins. Jesus is making it perfectly clear. It is a treasure. It is a treasure. And there is a process required to uncover and to find that in our own souls. So the field's our soul. So the work that has to be done, the digging that has to be done to try and find it is really a cumbersome task. But notice, and I'm sure Jesus is not talking about the permission given to be trespassing or to be stealing from someone else, but ultimately he's saying there should be no limitations to any of the work or desire or direction or energy we put into trying to find that treasure in our own lives. No mandate, no civilian structures, no social society norms should stop us from the value of what it is that we are searching for, and that we will cross any barrier to try to find that precious kingdom, which ultimately this person then becomes so excited about, sells everything else he has just to go and get that plot of land, because that treasure is now the centerpiece of his joy, fulfillment, contentment. The kingdom of God is like that. So the wonder is that, one, if this is the case, then God has planted within each and every one of us this kingdom that is there. But you and I have to do the work to try to get there. And sometimes when we stumble across just a bit of it, how much are we willing to give up and sacrifice of what we think or have become so comfortable living, thinking that this is joy, that we give that up because here is complete contentment. Here is fulfillment. Here is joy. Here is peace. Here is blessing in our life. How much are we willing to sacrifice of what we've been trained or have become habitual in, that we end up, one, even starting to look for a treasure somewhere else, but then ultimately, if we come across it, how much are we willing to sacrifice to keep it and to get it and to hold it and to possess it? Now, the second one is really interesting too. Now, none of us are jewelers. I don't think we have a jeweler in the congregation, and perhaps someone from home will call me this week and tell me about what it means to buy diamonds or jewels or whatever. But recognize this merchant is a merchant. This is what he does for a living. He buys and sells jewels and whatnot, and yet in the midst of all this, he's running around and he is looking and finds a pearl of significant value that he ultimately is overwhelmed with the beauty or the joy or the value of what that is, that recognize he takes all of the pearls and jewels that he currently has and owns, and he sells all of it. He sells all of them to come up with enough money to go back and to get that pearl. But recognize when he gets that pearl, what happens? He's no longer a merchant. He's given up being a merchant. Why? He's only got one pearl, and he wants that pearl. To him, the value of that pearl in his life is more important than what he has been trained or what he has seen as his occupation, or what has brought him joy in the past as being a trader or merchant of pearls. He now sells all of that, and what does he have now? Just the possession of the pearl, but the possession of the pearl makes everything else useless. There's no value in anything else that he was doing or saw himself doing or valued himself as doing, but now simply the possession of the pearl is enough for him and completes him. And so now he finds contentment and joy and satisfaction, meaning and purpose in this pearl, because this pearl is the greatest that he has ever seen or encountered or experienced in all of his years of being a merchant. This is what it is. This is what it's come down to. And so he gives up everything to simply possess the pearl. Not to work it, not to sell it, just simply to possess it. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus says, is like that. Notice, if you will, the enormous amount of work the merchant needs to go through in his life to come across the one pearl of incredible value. Notice how many travels he has made. Notice how much he has seen and experienced looking and buying and selling. Notice the process that is required. He just didn't decide one day he was going to be a merchant and the next day stumble across this and say, this is it, this is what it is. He has actually had a life experience of encountering and seeing and judging and valuing, how much is this pearl versus this pearl, how much is this jewelry versus that jewelry. We do the same thing in our lives. We do the same thing in our lives, trying to determine what is most valuable to us. What is it that we want? Where do we find our joy? Where do we find our satisfaction? We do this with jobs all the time, right? If you're not happy in a job, right, what do? You start looking for another job, and then you move to that job. If that job doesn't make you happy, right, you just end up finding, someone else. Now, there is, of course, a problem when we end up with a resume that has this person leaving every 6 months. It's probably an indication it's probably not the job. It might be the person submitting the resume. But the fact of the matter is that we do move all the time from one thing to another, until we find something that satisfies and fulfills us. The uniqueness here is that this merchant not only finds this pearl and wants this pearl, goes through this entire process of liquidating everything he has. He has to liquidate everything he has. Same thing with the guy who buys the field. Liquidates everything. Nothing else is as important as having the field so he could get the treasure, or selling all of his precious jewels and pearls so that he can get this one thing. And what is it? He goes through all of that process, and then in the end, for both of them, it's simply about the possession of that thing that they have stumbled across that now brings them fulfillment. And Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like that. But realize, in both instances, these are not just simple tasks that come to bear. These are things that these people have to go through a process of finding and wanting to desire and looking for in order to find it. It is something that requires a journey, a search. There is something that is required of them to do the work to find and ultimately encounter the treasure or the pearl. And ultimately, that, once they stumble upon that, there is no question in their mind. That's the other thing. There is no question in either one of these examples that this treasure and this pearl is the greatest of all things that could be possibly brought about into a person's life. There is no doubt, despite all of the experiences that they have had, everything they've done, all the digging they've done, all the shopping and buying and selling, out of all of their experiences, they know that this is the ultimate joy and fulfillment of their life. And you and I are like that as well. We move through life all the time looking for one thing or another to satisfy ourselves, right? There's this void inside of us. Augustine, one of the early church fathers, around the 300s, I believe, says and writes, our hearts are unsettled and unfulfilled until they find their fulfillment in you. Augustine said that. And so I think there's enormous validity to that. The question is, as much as we say and practice trying to be a Christian, are we also fully recognizing that God has planted within us that treasure, that pearl? And if we do the work of seeking Him out and finding that kingdom in our life, once we get there, our joy will be in the kingdom we uncover and not so much in the world and all of its suggestions of what brings about joy and happiness in our life. And if you have any doubts about that, watch commercials on TV. You never see a person wearing a certain type of clothing looking miserable. They're always smiling. It's the best t-shirt I've ever had ever, Look at this car, it's wonderful. These sneakers, my life is complete because I have these sneakers. I mean, we're surrounded by this. We're going to cut that whole section out just for the record. But the fact of the matter is we are easily led to believe that having this brings about this, right? And ultimately it's a promise of joy. If I have this, then I'll feel better about myself and then I'm happy. And yet at the same time, Jesus says, yes, there is joy to be found, but it's the kingdom of heaven. And by the way, it's not outside of you. And in both cases, you have to look and dig and search to find it. But it is worth the energy and the work to find it. Because once you do, you will fully experience what it means to be fully human, fully fulfilled, fully complete in all aspects of who and what we are. And if you're wondering what is the kingdom of heaven, what does that look like? It's Jesus. It's Jesus. It's a relationship with Jesus. It's that simple. And it's really not that hard to find. It's not that hard or that difficult. But it does require us stumbling along and trying to find what that is, and then ultimately grabbing hold of that and recognizing that if we have a relationship, and when we have a relationship with Jesus in our life, when we experience Him, then that experience is always available to us, but there are disciplines, there is work that we have to do in order to isolate and highlight and determine how we're going to make that the focal point of our joy, of our meaning, of our purpose. But that kingdom exists. That relationship exists. But there is work to get there. And more often than not, regrettably, we're easily distracted. We're just easily distracted. And so as much as we start digging, something else comes along and we go somewhere else, we come back. We might dig again. And we're like, we go somewhere else, we come back. But if we stayed digging, we'd find it. The problem is also that we want instantaneous results. And both of these parables pretty much indicate that's not the way it works. There's work to be done. And there's determination that is required. And there is consistency and effort that is required. But Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven, that place of contentment and peace and joy and absolute fulfillment exists for each and every one of us. God has already planted that inside of us. The question really comes down to, how much are we willing to cross all the borders? How much are we willing to risk? How much are we willing to go into strange areas of our lives trying to find that? And ultimately, how much are we willing to sacrifice to grab hold of it and make it a center part of our lives? God bless you.